All right, welcome. I'm your host, Eman, for Purposeful Patriarchs. Last episode that we did, we discussed the Me Too movement a little bit, and then the differentiation in terms of the power dynamics of so-called toxic masculinity, and that the second version is not, even though it's often labeled as toxic, it's nothing of the kind. So we'll continue from there and explain a bit more about this research. So let's go.
Toxic, but it's nothing of the kind. It is a sort of assertiveness that a healthy male engages when offering protection or taking leadership when it matters. It is an important aspect of what I would call decent masculinity. See, this is the problem. They're conflating the two. They're trying to use Weinstein and some of the more abusive nature of some men and graph what we call normal male behavior, normal masculine behavior, becomes to be men fight or continue to socialize to be vulnerable to what I call really that should make assertive, but that he gains society.
Yeah. So again, this is why we're starting to see this whole sort of feminization of the culture, where we're being told to get in tune with our sort of, be vulnerable, all these sorts of different things. And this is why, again, you see it again within the black men or the black manosphere, where they're talking about the fact that whenever they've tried to be vulnerable, it's been weaponized against them. And this is why black men are, in particular, especially black American men, us over here in the Brits, in Britain, I wouldn't say we haven't experienced this, but we've not experienced this for as long as black American males. And this is why they're against being vulnerable, not out of weakness, but they know that it does not serve them, because they're in a system where masculinity has never, and I will talk about this as well, is that patriarchy has never been a pattern within the black American community, hence why it's in such a disadvantaged state. So therefore, when it's already in such a disadvantaged state, you're asking those men to be even more supportive, even more subservient or submissive. Okay, I think it will, yeah. So I would, or maybe I don't know if the right word is submissive, but they're being trained even more, even though they're already in a black matriarchy or malformed matriarchy or gynocracy, whichever of the interchangeable terms you want to use. They're training them to be even further less assertive. So before, it was the white European American supremacy system that tamped down the masculinity of black men. Hence why I looked in the last episode about the sassy N-word, that they were lynched, even though the rest of the American society had a strut and had a male boastfulness, which was a national style for white America, but that wasn't the case for the black men or for the Negro men, as it talks about in the Moynihan report. So so they're training. So this training of less assertive manhood started off in the black community, but then it's now, because of feminism and the benefits of feminism in terms of putting women above men, it's training black men to be even less assertive, and it's making white men less assertive as well. And again, all of this is against God's design. God wants men to understand they have a God-given authority in terms of leading themselves, ultimately by the power of God. So that's why we follow Christ. So he leads us, but then also using that God-given authority to look after the world, to work and look after the world and tend to the world, and then obviously to multiply with your spouse. And that's assertiveness to protect your spouse and your family, not just necessarily to rule and domineer and to essentially use that authority to harm those who you're supposed to be protecting. Um, um, yeah. So yeah. Okay. So let's continue.
Here's something interesting. Universities seem to grasp this at some level, although they inevitably mischaracterize it. One article suggests encouraging young men to emulate the following example, among others, of standing up to wrongful behavior. They're intervening bystander. Matter of fact, that is a basic first felony assault. He's just doing right. Let humanity, in fact, rescuing a damsel in distress. According to this, and I think that's essentially not admit there's either think business is failure. Me of the problems with lines and Indian particular medicine. In Hollywood is served and running for human city for wolf, twist or demons. Couldn't that art my scene debacle. It was me to the ocean being two women to deploy irritations. Few times we see it was Barfay or Philadelphia to live sit down. It's being hit over with this. Some of whom consider it about it. Jitter the took it into a root in my life, and that is the big crew.
Yeah. So again, this is why, yeah, I don't personally subscribe to gender. I talk more about sex because sex is based on your chromosomes, which are indelible, they're permanent, they can't be changed. And this is, again, this is the whole propaganda, the socialization, and essentially what's happening is that in university campuses or college campuses, as they call them in America, that's your training ground to sort of socialize you into a sort of more feminist state of mind. And this is why we have to teach the next generation and retrain ourselves to see us how God has essentially designed us. As it says in Genesis, in the beginning, God created them both male and female, you know, and that's something that is still true today. You have outliers, you know, androgynous and all these different things, but in the main, that is both male and female. Okay? This is why you don't see, you know, homosexual couples or alphabet couples able to produce children naturally, just through intercourse, for example. And once you go through this, it basically creates an unnatural environment similar to Hollywood and Tinseltown, where, you know, everything is there for play, not a serious environment, even though Hollywood is a serious environment. And it talks about the fact that it's a very political, wealth, it's ambitious place, that is Hollywood. But it's not normal place in terms of it reflecting the rest of general society. Hollywood is an outlier, and in these places, that's where you're able to see such these sort of so-called these offer types, and this is why, again, this is why this research is essentially done, because outside of that Hollywood environment, you don't get that type of you know, so-called debunked alpha type. But yeah, this is why, you know, reading the research and the papers really does begin to, because these people are able to look at this stuff from a long-term view and look at this stuff over decades. And they're not just talking from, they're not talking from it from an opinion-based point of view. They've actually rooted it in observational realities. Okay, and they're willing to be honest.
Nobody knows what they are. Real meetings been related to air confines of the oil and gymnasium. Females asked out news in random sensitive hot while women from one partners to Isabel Nanos is false society and is strict biological buck rate.
Yeah, again, psychological buck break. Again, this is why we link it back to the history of what happened within the the back or the slave class, the Negro class, in terms of, we know that the image, the physical strong father figure, as I read in the Moynihan report in the previous videos, that they psychologically and physically buck broke black men through various different forms. And again, that started off in America, and now has been sort of passed on through feminism. Okay. And it's kind of crazy to kind of see everything, and this is why a lot of young men are now confused. They don't have that humanity, they don't have that dignity, they don't have that self-respect. Again, it's the same thing that happened to black men, and we're just seeing some of the similarities and differences, because before, when this happened to black men, this was it was forced onto them. They had no way out of this. Whereas in society today, this is happening because people are choosing to go down this route, which again, in both of them, and this is why I talk about it from a spiritual perspective, from a perspective of the Christian faith, is that there are the gospel realigns and helps to fix our view of our personal human dignity and our personal and our sort of macro view on our sexuality, in terms of a male and a female. And God can help us correct that if we submit to his word, submit to what he wants for our life, even though there is a culture outside of us which is trying to go against that, which is being pushed by the devil. And we have to be strong and know what God is saying through his word, and how that actually benefits us on a human personal level, but also from a macro wider society level.
It makes sense. So it makes sense that unnatural alpha and beta male behavior would emerge amidst such confusion. In other words, that what we call these alpha and beta male behavior is unnatural. The competition between so-called alphas and so-called betas is unnatural. The real super must be administration and minister look alike. I'm
going to call it because the next part, I really want to talk about this solution for the alpha males, in terms of the fact that it's, yeah, I'll talk about it in the next video. I'll stop it there. But again, I appreciate you stop listening to this research, listening to this part, and me just continuing the narrative and putting my own spin on it. Because again, it's all about building families, you know, from a macro point of view, but also specifically for the black community, for black culture, because this is something that has destroyed that community, and this is why they cannot progress in the West. And these patterns are still sadly with us today, and we need to